Hi, this is Rupak Saluja, and you're listening to Flux Navigators. I'm a producer and media entrepreneur and founder of Mumbai LA production company Bang Bang. I'm also a diplobrat, or the kid of a diplomat, and that's one of the main reasons I've had the unique opportunity to live in 13 cities and 10 countries on 6 continents. It's a major part of my identity, you could say. So, I've grown up with the deep-seated belief that the world is a very small place, and I have the strong desire to make everyone else internalize that too. It's also the reason I'm somewhat of a chameleon when it comes to my English. My accent unconsciously switches depending on whom I'm talking to. Sometimes that freaks people out, but that's how it's always been since I was a little kid. But enough about me, let's move on to the show. Since that fateful day at CES 2016 when Netflix announced it was going live in 130 new countries in one shot, we've been living in a new content paradigm, one where audiences around the world are watching content created around the world, en masse. It's what I like to call the decentralization of Hollywood. Join me on Flux Navigators as I shoot the shit with creators, writers, showrunners, producers, directors, investors, media executives, and other key voices shaping this new global reality. Welcome to Flux Navigators. What's up, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Flux Navigators with my guest that I have with me over here on Zoom, founder and CEO of Impact Creative Systems, Tyler Mitchell. And I'm currently in Mumbai, and Tyler is currently in Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So glad we could do this. And what I do, my first question that I usually ask my guests, and I say usually even though I haven't had 100 guests so far, is this, which is, so what are you currently obsessing over?
Wow, that's a great question. Impact is very much a startup. So I am obsessing over that. Everything you hear or read about, Silicon Valley backed startups is true. Living and breathe that 24/7. But besides that, and, my kids and my passion for skiing, I would say on a content level, I'm really obsessing over the half hour space. I think that what's happening in half hour television is really incredible. Since, in early days, Nurse Jackie, and then, shows like Fleabag, Catastrophe, and now comedies like Dave and Mythic Quest, Raven's Banquet, Mandalorian. They're packing these shows that were typically half hour comedy spaces with so much emotion and thematics that has become one of the most interesting places in TV. WandaVision has really blown me away with what they've done this year. And one of my favorite quotes of all time is from Ernest Hemingway, who said, sorry that I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. And I think half hour spaces and the shows right now are really packing in so much information, so much story, so much character and emotion and themes that it's really become a masterful art form. And Schitt's Creek, as well, I think is another one of those incredible shows, and it also shows you the global nature, of these shows as well. Fleabag in the UK and Catastrophe from the UK as well, and yeah, it's just a really exciting time.
That's totally fascinating. That's a great answer that actually allows us to talk about a lot, and I'm going to come back to that. And full disclosure, guys, So I had technical issues while Tyler was talking, and I lost everything he said between WandaVision and Schitt's Creek. So I'm going to ask him, I'm going to catch up on that later. But what I did do was go straight into this question just to kind of give a little bit of a feel of what the guy's about without getting into his background. But what you usually do, obviously, is I want to know a lot more because Tyler and I, we've spoken before, and we've done a call a few months ago to talk about the work that's going on at Impact. But I don't really know all that much about him, which is great because I get to find out along with all of you listeners. So Tyler, tell us, are you a Los Angeles native? Did you grow up there? Or where are you from? And how did you actually end up getting into the entertainment business? What were your influences growing up that actually led to that?
I'm not a Los Angeles native. I'm a proud NorCal person outside San Francisco, and it's funny growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's sort of this one way hatred towards Los Angeles from San Francisco.
I
Everyone
know
in San
what you're
Francisco.
saying. I know what you're saying because my brother and his wife, sorry to interrupt, they spent. I mean, my brother obviously has the same kind of background as I have, and my sister in law is originally from Texas, but they met in the Bay Area. They're from that area, and they lived in LA. And literally next week, they're driving back to move back to the Bay Area. And we have this. And even though I don't live in LA, we have this rivalry, North NorCal, SoCal kind of rivalry. And it's weird because neither of us are from there, but I totally hear you. It's like in the family right now.
Yeah, it's really funny. I mean, everyone in you sort of when I was growing up, you kind of were, just led to believe that Southern California was this, sort of this place that was, a bit vapid or, not as substantive as Northern California. Yet everyone in Southern California loves Northern California. So it was this odd dynamic growing up. But my influence, from the time as far back as I can remember, I've always loved storytelling, cartoons, TV shows. I was definitely a product of the late 70s and 80s, growing up and being put in front of a television for many, many years and watching movies that I probably shouldn't have been watching. Like I went and saw Lethal Weapon alone in a theater when I was 7 years old. And I took my dad back the next day because I loved the movie so much. So I was exposed to, movies and shows from a really young age. And when I was 12 years old, sadly, my best friend passed away of brain cancer over the course of a year, and that really had a very deep impact on my life. And so when I was applying to college, I wrote my college essay on carpe diem and seizing the day. And when I started in university, I really looked towards the end, of my life because I thought, here my friend was at 12 years old who passed away, and essentially, if I could be anybody in the world, who would I be? And I had been sort of on a track at that point to be an international investment banker. I, had studied Japanese and Portuguese in college, and I was an economics major. But I really gave pause and said, if I could be anybody that I could when I grew up, who would I want to be? And entertainment and film and television was this huge part of my life. And in fact, my sisters used to say that I didn't, even have my own personality. They said that I was just an amalgamation of movie and TV quotes because I have a really good memory for quotes, and I used to be able to quote movies front to back, across many genres. And so when I got to college, it was funny. This was 1995, and a friend of mine said, there's this thing called IMDb, and you can actually look up credits of the movies people that worked on, like at the computer lab, right? Like you had to go to the computer lab and like dial up internet. And so I had honestly never ever considered the entertainment as a career. The only thing I knew about entertainment really was actors, and I can't say that I was even a student of film in terms of knowing directors or anything like that. But I went to the computer lab and I started looking up all of my favorite movies, and it turned out that the thing that they had in common was they were predominantly produced by the same three people: Jerry Bruckheimer, Scott Rudin, and Brian Grazer. And of those three people, I looked at Brian Grazer's credit and I said, wow, he does TV and film. He does comedy. He does action. He does prestige. I don't know what a producer is, but I want to be that. Like I want to be that person. And so I sort of set my mind on wanting to become a producer from the time I was 18 years old. And I started interning in college, in Hollywood that following summer and every summer since then. And really just dedicated myself to that industry. And I quickly realized when I was in college, because I was taking a road trip, because I drove cross country to get to school every year, and a friend of mine had this internship at Alphaville, which was Jim Jackson, Sean Daniels' company, and they had a bungalow on Universal. And so my friend from college said, "Hey, stop by." And I remember driving onto the Universal lot for the first time and going into a producer bungalow and seeing the movie posters on the wall. My friend was getting paid to like eat red vines, drink soda and read screenplays. And, we were driving around the lot on a golf cart. And the only time I'd ever been to Universal Studios was on the tour. And I thought, are you kidding me? Like you're getting paid a summer internship to do this? Like I have to have this job. And so that's where I started. I started interning, at a young age, and set my sights on being a producer and kind of never looked back.
Wow, that's some story, and I love what you said about the fact that as a 12-year-old, and I can't even imagine how it would be to have gone through that kind of an experience that you went through of losing your best friend, and what that can do to the mind of a 12-year-old. And obviously, lucky for you, it really impacted you in a positive way. There was a silver lining to that, and it's the fact that you were able to visualize, this is who I want to be, and then what do I need to do to get there, is awesome, because I'm really into that kind of visualization and thinking about it. But I was probably about 25 years older than you were when I first did it, and so it really really resonates with me. And sometimes I think that, man, why couldn't I be thinking like this as a teenager or a kid? And it looks like you were. So no, that's fascinating. And I, it's funny because there's so many stories of people who actually, looked at online and actually said, who's behind this and who's behind that, and then you actually go and pursue it, and soon enough you end up working with those people. And I guess that's a great thing about this business, is that time and time again, you hear real icons and successful people talk about this over and over, which is, you just go and do it, and you just get any job possible. It really doesn't matter what you're doing. You just get into the environment, and then you work your way up. I think that's the great thing about this business, which I think is, it's probably similar in related industries like advertising as well, but I don't think it's the case in many other businesses. So it really doesn't matter what you're going to be doing. It's really about being immersed in the environment, and you do whatever it takes to prove yourself over the next 2 years, so that you actually, and then by the end of year 2, you could be way ahead of people who started, 3 years before you. So that's the great thing about this business, and I think that's the case the world over.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would say, a couple things to listeners out there who are, interested in a career in entertainment. Well, first of all, I want to say it was not an easy decision. My father told me that I was throwing my life away, because I was, an economics major, and, my parents were in finance and things like that. And I was, departing greatly from that and going into a business where, it was very insular. I knew absolutely no one in Hollywood. I had no connections, no nothing. And my parents felt like they couldn't help me, and that my education couldn't help me either. And I did realize when I went out there, I fought, I got 2 internships. I got that internship at Alphaville. Then I also got an internship at New Line Cinema at the time. And I realized very quickly that it is an apprenticeship business, and no one cares where you went to college, what degree you have, what your GPA is, like all of those stats that matter to all of the other jobs that you're pursuing. didn't compute. But that being also said, when I graduated, I took an assistant job. One of the few people that I had met, while I was in college was Barry Levinson, and I cornered him at a Christmas party, actually, when I was probably 20 years old. And I said, I want to be a producer. Like, what should I do? And he said, if you want to be a producer, you should learn every job in the business, because that's what producing is. And I really took that to heart. And I've had a very circuitous route through the entertainment industry. But everything is about one job leading to the next. And that first assistant job that I got out of college, working for Jonathan Lynn on a movie called The Whole Nine Yards, I mean, I was making $300 a week, and my friends, who graduated from college were making, $50,000 a year base salary plus bonus. So, it was, you do sacrifice to follow your passion, for sure. And following your dreams is something that is very difficult. But I think the sooner you commit to that path, the better off you'll be, because whenever you do decide to commit to that path, it's going to be a long journey, and you're going to be starting from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that what you just said is totally true. And I started in the advertising industry, which is very similar to the entertainment industry in that respect. And this is the same the world over, I think, pretty much in every country, which is that you start and all your other friends from college who become consultants or investment bankers or everything are making 3 to 4 times what you're making. And you're doing it for love and fresh air, essentially, for the first 5 to 6 to 7 years. And finally, things start to catch up later. But there's people in your family just can't get it, and they're scratching their heads thinking, why are you doing this? And then at the same time, when I went to business school, I remember you're doing it for the love of it, right? And when I went to business school, I remember speaking to one of my classmates, and I went to INSEAD in France and Singapore, and I remember talking to one of my, he was a French classmate, Charles, who said, I asked him, so what are you going to do after INSEAD? It was one of those conversations over lunch. And he said, oh, well, I'm going to become an investment banker. But I said, oh, and so because that's what he was before. Oh, so I'm going to go back into investment banking. I was like, oh, so you really like it? He said, no, I fucking hate it. So I said, why are you going to do it? He said, it's the only thing I know how to do. I don't know anything else that can make me money. So I realized that people are completely programmed differently when it comes to career and life decisions on that. So, Tyler, so you got into entertainment, and how did you get to Imagine, or what was the story there?
Yeah, the ironic part of that is that it took me close to 20 years to even meet, Brian, who was my, kind of my idol, looking up to in the business. I took that advice that Barry gave me to heart. So, I worked at a production company, I interned at a production company, a studio, another production company. Then when I got out of college, funny enough, because I got this director, Jonathan Lynn, a hotel room that couldn't be gotten. And I had some connections in Napa Valley, actually, at the time. It's a random story. He ended up saying, I want this person, because I was friends with his son, to be my assistant because he's really resourceful. And I wanted to have on-set experience. And so I worked for Jonathan on The Whole Nine Yards with Bruce Willis and Matthew Perry and Amanda Peet. And then that job led to another job working for a director on another movie. Both of those directors had the same agent, Ken Kamins, who was a partner at ICM at the time. And I went to work for Ken because I wanted to work for specific people versus kind of organizations. And Ken was a person who was one of the three people at the time who understood international packaging and financing. And it was him, John Patak, and Cassian Elways, and he actually represented directors and put movies together. And I had gotten some experience with that, like having worked for two of his directors' clients. So I ended up getting a job working for Ken, and that was one of the greatest, learning experiences of my life. And he was an incredible mentor, and it also complemented my skills as, someone who had studied economics, because back then, tax breaks and production incentives were honestly really trade secrets. And while I was, working with Ken, he put together Gangs of New York, which was a $200 million independent movie. Traffic, Lord of the Rings, had just started shooting. He represents, Peter Jackson, The Way of the Gun with Chris McQuarrie, Dr. T and the Women, Gosford Park. I mean, I think he put together something like 16, 17 movies, while I was on his desk, and I was just sort of a sponge. And and then the relationships that I had built, as an intern, because I would fly back to LA, twice a year at least, like while I was in school, to keep up relationships with the assistants that I had met. For example, Roy Lee, who's now one of the biggest producers in Hollywood, I was his intern when he was an assistant, and then I met, Chris Bender and JC Spank around that same time. And they had just started, Bender Spink, this new kind of rogue management company. And so they actually recruited me to leave ICM and become part of this, this startup film financing company called Film Engine. And before I knew it, I was, vice president of this startup company. I literally got hired. There's no furniture. There's like a card table. And we ended up, financing and producing 7 movies for, New Line in 5 years. And we had a negative pickup deal with them, and, put together movies like, The Butterfly Effect and The Rum Diary. And so I would say that I gambled on myself in terms of trying to get as much actual on the job real experience as I could, even though I was only 23 years old. Because the truth of the matter is, and I'm sure you would say the same, like producing, like being an entrepreneur, there is no playbook. Every movie, every show, everything is different personalities, different stories, different locations. And the more real-time experience you get in those pressure situations, the better off you're going to be in the long term. And if you're going to make mistakes, make them early.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And it's funny because your story about the hotel room and getting a hotel room that was hard to get reminded me of actually what I would consider, very weirdly, my own real break in advertising. I was living in Budapest at the time. I started my career at Young and Rubicam in Budapest, and I did really well as an intern, and then I got hired. And when I got hired, just 2 weeks before I got hired, there was a CEO change, and my Hungarian CEO moved to Y&R New York, and there was an English guy who came in who saw me, and I was not being Hungarian, being an Indian guy who didn't really speak Hungarian. I was learning it, but he was like, why do we have someone who can't even speak Hungarian at that level? And he just couldn't see the need for me over there. And so he was like, okay, we'll give him a chance. I was like, okay, give me 2 months to prove myself. He was like, okay. And he would just walk in, he would walk in and go, are you busy? What are you doing? And he would question me about all kinds of things. And I was literally twiddling my thumbs for some reason. And he said to me, I know how you can make yourself useful. Why don't you organize some PIMS? And so there was this English
PIMS
guy in Budapest, obviously missing his PIMS in the summer, and so he asked me to organize some PIMS, and I was like, oh my god! So how do I do this in Budapest? So I started calling the bars in, there were a couple of Irish pubs, and I know we don't have PIMS, and it was just something that was very English and from London pubs, and eventually, it so happened that my dad at the time was the Indian ambassador in Budapest. Okay, and they were leaving soon, and I wasn't trying to play that up or anything, but I just, I went home to my parents. I was like, okay, there's this thing, and so my mom was like, oh, I'll just call Susan. And so Susan was the wife of the British ambassador, and she was like, Susan, do you have any pins? She was like, oh yeah, sure. I'll even send you the flowers that go with it. And literally the next day, I I walked in with a bottle and the herbs that went with it, and I put it on his desk. And he was completely shocked, and he said, "So how did you get that?" And I said, "Oh well, I got it from the British embassy." He was like, "What?" So anyway, so that suddenly his image of me changed, and whatever. Okay, it was because of my family connections or whatever it was, but still, I think it showed him that I was resourceful, and that began sort of my trajectory in the advertising industry. So it can come from, you can work your ass off, you can do whatever you want, but it can come from the weirdest places. And, just being resourceful and showing that you can get shit done and use whatever you have at your disposal is what people are looking for. I guess if you look at it, I'm sure that's what you're looking for and what I'm looking for in people who come on board today to join you and be part of your team, right?
I mean, resourcefulness is a superpower. It really is, and it reminds me, of so many stories. But one is, like, when Hunter S. Thompson passed away, I was we were involved with the Rum Diary and pretty close with the estate, and Johnny Depp wanted to fire his ashes out of a cannon in Aspen, but you can't actually transport remains over state lines, and so the firework company was in a different state, and we had to figure out how to get Hunter's remains into fireworks so that they could be fired out of a cannon per his wishes, and so. Honestly, like resourcefulness, like when it comes to our business locations, battle scenes, whatever it is. I was actually just telling a story today about how Miguel Sapochnik came up with the idea for the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones, and it was because of this huge rain delay that whole sequence happened with Jon Snow at the bottom of the pile of bodies. And you really just have to be incredibly resourceful in this industry, I think, to succeed, because you're constantly thrown curveballs that you can't expect.
Absolutely. I think, and that's what makes it so much fun. And to our younger listeners out there, honestly, it just gets more and more. And I think that as you sort of get into a position of more authority and more sort of influence, you really want to hone that ability and lean into it, because you get to do it in a different way, I guess. And that's actually, as you said, it's a superpower that you need to keep sharpening and honing as you go along, because it will continue to be your superpower. And speaking of superpowers, I think what you're doing at Impact is truly unique, and I think it's time to talk about a little bit about that and how you eventually. So you got to Imagine, and how long have you been part of the Imagine family?
Almost 6 years now.
Okay, and initially you were producing for Imagine.
Yeah. So initially, it's funny. I was approached by Imagine through a whole other kind of long story and series of events, but it was always the gold ring. They were the superheroes, Ron and Brian for me. And I actually worked 2 floors down. I was a partner in a production company at the time, on the 5th floor, and Imagine was on the 7th floor of the building. But I had never met Ron. I had never met Brian. And then, I had got approached that they were looking for, a senior executive in the feature department. And to be honest, at that point, I really wanted to meet Brian, but I didn't think that I would take the job because I didn't want to be at a studio based production company. They had a 30-year deal with Universal producing movies, and they had a TV deal with Fox at the time. And I was very entrepreneurial by nature. I had my own company. I had produced TV. I had written for TV. I had made movies, financed movies, but I really wanted to meet Brian. And when I sat down with him, um, he explained how Imagine right at that time had taken on independent financing, was going to break from their studio deals, and basically, kind of become a mini major, and with significant financing, and grow all of these sort of one-off things that they had done, like documentaries or animation, um, you know, uh, you know, TV, like production, all kinds of things, like really into a much bigger enterprise. And I said, wow, that's exciting, and I want to be a part of that journey. And so I joined them as a feature executive. Worked on a whole slate of movies. Then ended up meeting the founders of Animalogic, Zare, Albanian, who's an incredible animator. They did all the Lego movies. They won the Oscar for the movie with the penguin.
Happy Feet.
Happy Feet.
Oh,
Yeah, they won.
yeah.
I met Zara Nalbandian of Animalogic, who produced Happy Feet, which won the Oscar. And so we ended up forming this partnership between Animalogic and Imagine, which started with this movie called Shrinking the Treehorns, which is actually the first animated movie that Ron is going to direct, which just got greenlit, which I'm extremely excited about. And while they had done, animated movies producing in the past, like Curious George, this is the first, movie that Ron is going to be directing. And so I went from, a live action, executive to the head of animation, and was building up our animation slate with Animalogic, and we had a deal with Warner Brothers. And that's when Brian had this idea for this content accelerator. And Brian is this very famously curious person, and has all these relationships in various industries across the world. And he had met somebody named Paul Graham, who had founded a company called Y Combinator, which is sort of the preeminent internet startup accelerator. And the idea behind that company, for those who don't know, is anyone in the world can apply with an idea for a business and a business plan, and they have to go through this application process. It's like a college application, and then people are selected, and if you get in, you're essentially partnered and mentored by top entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley for 3 months. They give you $120,000 for 7% of your company. And then at the end of it, they take you to what they call demo day, and you have 60 seconds to pitch your business to the top 400 venture capitalists in the world. And from that sprung companies like Dropbox and Airbnb and Quora and Reddit and all these multi-billion-dollar companies. And Brian said, if the people in Silicon Valley can find entrepreneurs with ideas for businesses that turn into multi-billion-dollar businesses, shouldn't we be able to do the same thing for writers? I mean, and he was right. He said, I've done over 100 startups. Like, I am an entrepreneur, and it's the same thing. And honestly, like, it really resonated with me, because you actually are looking for someone who has a great idea for a product that has product market fit. You have to put together a team, assemble it, market it. It has to be sold. And startups or products or movies, they're kind of all the same thing and operate the same way. And I kind of raised my hand and was excited about the idea, and sort of what started as this extra credit project turned into this very, very, very full-time job of launching Impact. And and before I knew it, we had built, I had built this system with, I was myself, my assistant, and one other hire, Dara Lyson, who's now vice president, Daniel Unger, my assistant at the time, who's now our director of content. And we launched this accelerator program that operated like those. Like, we built a system where we felt that we could discover talent at scale globally. And the whole idea was, let's democratize access to the entertainment industry. There are so many barriers to entry for people. It's hard enough to break in as a writer, if you live in Los Angeles, but if you live in another state or another country, like, how do you get recognized in a world where, there are, like, not like athletics, there's no statistics that prove that you can run fast or throw fast or excel as an athlete. There aren't, really grades that get you anywhere. There aren't certifications, like a Series 7 or various financial, things. So how do you separate how do you separate yourself? How do you actually discover the talented people? And Hollywood, I would say, in its defense, the reason why it's so, gated and opaque is because everyone thinks that they could be in the movie business and be a screenwriter or be an actor. And, and so there's this, a barrage of people who are constantly trying to get in. But, the truth of the matter is, to be, an actor, a director, a writer in Hollywood, it means that you're not just one of the best, storytellers in your state, region or country. Like, you really are one of the best in your world. So in the world. So how do we build a system to discover talent at scale? And while everything is subjective in the arts, there are people whose subjectivity over time resonates with wider audiences than others. And Ron and Brian, with their almost 40-year, history, are those people. And so we were able to create a system that looked for the qualities, not just in a project, not just an idea, but really in people, and a holistic view of individuals, which is how Ron and Brian, have instinctively looked at people throughout their career, because they have launched so many people's career throughout their history, to figure out, like, what is the DNA that kind of makes a sustainable talent in our business. And and we had no idea if it was going to work, and no one thought it was, going to work, and everybody was suspect. But, the results now, 2.5 years later, where we've had 86 writers accepted, we've had 60,000 people apply from 125 countries, and the 86 writers who have come through, 40, they had no representation, all signed by top tier agencies. A completely, we removed all unconscious bias. It's a meritocratic process, which led to natural diversity, age range from 20s to 60s, 11 different nations represented, about 38%, BIPOC, 11% LGBTQIA plus, people who didn't get into Impact because it's a diversity program, but just because they're the most talented people in the world. Because we believe that if you try to find the most talented people in the world, they are going to look like the world. And so now to see, the success that our writers have had in the industry, kind of has led to these deals that we've had with our first international accelerator, with Impact Australia, that we've done in partnership with the Australian government, Impact Netflix, our partnership with them, Impact Skydance, and we're really, democratizing access to everybody in the world to be able to apply and have a shot at getting into Hollywood. And it's been very gratifying to see the lives we've changed and the careers we've launched from people who honestly would I don't believe would ever have found their way through.
Wow, it's really gratifying just to hear you explain that to start with. So I can imagine how it feels to have started this thing. And you said that there were a lot of people. The idea was suspect in the eyes of a lot of people, and that truly defines the most groundbreaking ideas. I mean, two guys renting out an air mattress sounds like a pretty, and trying to build a global business on that sounds like a pretty shitty idea if you think about it in that way. Hey, so I think it's absolutely amazing that you were able to visualize that and work together with that backing and actually make it what it's become today. I particularly love that fact that you describe this as the democratization of the barriers to entry or entry into entertainment, because you're right. And I think that couples beautifully with what is pretty much the theme, even though we don't call it out. It is kind of the theme of this podcast, which is talking about the phenomenon of the decentralization of Hollywood. Actually, I think we do call it out. But
I think it was in your introductory thing, and I actually thought, I was like, wow, this is really teed up well for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also the other thing that I wanted to talk about for a second, point out, is you mentioned that you believe that if you sign on or if you look for the most talented people out there, you're going to end up finding a representation of what the world looks like. And I could not agree more. You obviously, if it doesn't end up looking like that, then you have to take the measures to correct it. But if you just go about it naturally with no bias, with an open mind, and are open to everything that comes toward you, as long as there are no artificial barriers to entry or anything that is holding certain the representation of certain kind of people back, whether it is across gender, countries, race, whatever kind of identity it might be. If it's all open and a completely level playing field, it will end up looking like the world. So that totally resonates with me. This is a very engaging conversation, and I hate to interrupt it right in the middle, but with that, I think we're going to take a break and end this episode so you guys can tune in to the next episode of Flux Navigators to catch the rest of my conversation with the very captivating Tyler Mitchell.